history of philosophy is the history of efforts made by the human mind to reach by discursive thought the deepest reasons of all things. That is, to understand their intimate nature, their first causes, and their ultimate destinies. We are not to suppose that men in the earliest ages were in total ignorance on these important points. On the contrary, we find that many of the most remote traditions of the human race, as traced by students of antiquity among various nations, were much nobler and more comfortable to the truth than some doctrines invented by philosophers in later times. But those primeval teachings were remnants of the original revelation made directly by the Creator to our first parents. As such, they do not strictly belong to philosophy, because this science embraces only such knowledge as is attained by natural reason. Yet it is important to note the existence of this primitive teaching, for it sets aside the modern scientific speculations of those who love to describe the first men as savages, but little elevated above the brute beasts, as is done, for instance, by Dr. Blair in his well-known lectures on rhetoric. The facts of history are at variance with such theories. Quote, "It cannot be denied," writes Friedrich von Schlegel in his Aesthetic and Miscellaneous Works, "that the early Indian possessed a knowledge of the true God. All their writings are replete with sentiments and expressions noble, clear, and severely grand, as deeply conceived and as reverentially expressed as in any human language in which men have spoken of their God." The original tradition of revealed truth was in the course of ages gradually obscured and mixed with many errors, so that the remnants of it were no longer sufficient to satisfy the thoughtful mind. Then began various speculations on the nature and origin of the world, giving rise to philosophic systems. The study of these systems is our task. In almost all of these systems, errors were blended with the truth. Now, errors are not worth knowing for their own sake, but the study of errors enables us to understand the truth more distinctly, and aids us to appreciate it more highly, just as shading in a picture enhances by contrast the light and beauty of the more important features. Therefore, though the scholastic system presents the best answers that human reason has so far given to the great questions of the mind, still we derive from the study of other systems a clearer understanding of our own system, and we rest with increased satisfaction in the enjoyment of the treasure we therein possess. Besides, this study is highly interesting, and it evokes a vigorous exercise of our mental powers. It is interesting because it exhibits to our eyes nobler struggles than those of warriors, and more important discoveries than those made by travelers and explorers. It evokes a vigorous exercise of our mental powers, both in striving to understand many lofty and keen speculations of human thought, and in drawing the line of demarcation between what is true and what is false, what is certain and what is doubtful in their various systems. The history of philosophy is obviously to be divided into two periods, the one antecedent and the other subsequent to the diffusion of the Christian religion. For Christianity, when it arose, poured forth such a flood of light upon the great questions of the soul that philosophy in consequence underwent a vast transformation. The difference between these two divisions of philosophy is described by Dr. Albert Stockel in Handbook of the History of Philosophy. Quote, "Christ is the central point of all history. His coming into the world has been called by the Apostle the fullness of time. He was the scope and the consummation of the times that preceded him. He was the point of departure for the time that followed, for the events that filled it have been hallowed by the redemption he effected." For the Christian, all history is thus divided into two great periods, and, with the rest, the history of philosophy. This view is in strict accordance with the facts of the case. The philosophy which preceded and that which followed Christ differ more widely in character than the philosophies of any of the periods subordinate to these. The world has never witnessed such a revolution in human thought, such an enlargement of the range of human knowledge as that effected by the introduction of Christianity.